Hey y'all, how's it going? Good to see ya. Hey, we are in, actually, it's been 6 months of doing this. You know what time it is. It's the beginning of the 30-30 challenge. Woo! Woo! If you've been doing it for 6 months, give yourself a big clap. If you've been doing it for just any time, get on it. Give yourself a clap too. You should do it. Everyone needs a little clap every now and then. All right, so here's the deal. We are in the 30-30 challenge. Remember, our challenge to our church each and every month is 30 minutes a week for 30 days, right? So here's what that looks like. You know, you've got time. Hopefully, you've already got a quiet time. If you don't have a Bible time, then just start small. Just put something in. Find 10 minutes a day, try to find time. If you've already got that, I want to take the next step, right? So if you've been here, you've seen these videos long enough, what we do with families, what we do with our kids is we do something called Cornerstones. It's a great little book to go a little bit deeper with them, to get them to think about theological topics. Another book that I've made a few videos of and talked through a few of them is New City Catechism. This is the devotional one, but adults, if you don't have a thing to kind of think through big theological questions, I highly recommend getting the New City Catechism. There's one for every day of the week, and just walk through those and let that kind of stretch your thinking. Because one of the things about doing this, right, whether you're going through Cornerstones or New City Catechism, and both of those are catechisms in a way, is they're just meant to make you think, go a little bit further. And so we want to go beyond, like, I know the Bible stories. I want to go beyond, yeah, I know what happened here, and I know, a lot of time I think church people, we get stuck in like the children's storybook version of everything, right? Oh, I know what happens to Daniel and Liza. Oh, I know what happens, but we really don't think theologically about these things. We don't really look at the text. We just sort of know the stories. So one of the things I like about that is, like, today, where we're going in the 30-30 challenge is this question, right? What happened to Adam and Eve after God judged them, right? And so you might say, well, they were kind of, not in the garden anymore. Okay. You might have a couple elements to that, but I want you to go deeper, right? I want to go think deeper about what does this all mean and point to. So I'm going to give you a couple things. Some of this is tricky, right? So if you've got kids that you're trying to explain this to, especially if they're younger, it's kind of trying to boil some of this down. And so maybe for just kids, right, you are going to stay pretty, elementary in terms of the elements. But if you've got older ones, press a little bit more about significance of some of these questions, right? So here's the answer, right? What happened to Adam and Eve after God judged them? Well, our book tells us the answer that you want your kids to know is after God judged Adam and Eve, they had to leave the Garden of Eden. Now, let's look at that and begin to think about that, right? Because that's one element of it. God judges them and they leave the garden, okay? Let's look at what that all entails, right? So what was it that God did prior to giving the judgment? So glad you asked. Let's go to the text, shall we? So we'll go to my Bible, and here's what you should be seeing, right? So look at verse 20. The man named his wife Eve because she was the mother of all the living. Now, I want you to pause right there, okay? So if we go to this text, right, we see that in order what happened, right, is God gives the judgments. He gives it to the serpent. He gives it to Eve. He gives it to man, right? Right after this, the first thing that we find after the first set of judgment is given is we see the name change, right? He's already called her woman, right, because she was taken from man. Now he gives her the name Eve. Now, Eve, it's interesting that the word Eve in that text is very similar rooted to the word living or life, right? And so one of the things that's important about this is look at verse 20. She is to become the mother of all the living. Now, this is a highlighted moment because even though they would surely die, the hope is that you already see is that God is going to provide them life still, by the fact that he's going to allow them to have kids. But the highlight is this is right up, remember early on what was said, right? Look at this text. Go back up, right, and we'll go in to see this. Verse 15, I'll put hostility as he's talking to the serpent. between you and the woman, between your offspring and her offspring. He will strike your head, you will strike his heel. So it's important to understand that God is giving them the grace of going to have children, which Psalm 127, look that up. But also the understanding is that from her will come that one who will finally crush the head of the serpent. So that's hope number one. We see God bring judgment. We also see God beginning to bring hope. And then it says this, look, it's fascinating. 21, God made clothing from the skins for man and his wife, and he clothed them. Now, look, at this point, they're holding on. They got little, fig leaves that they've sewed onto themselves to try to cover themselves. I don't know what that would have looked like. If you know anything about figs, I grew up with fig trees. There's this like white, milky stuff, and it's like almost glue is what it looks like. It ain't nice. Like, I don't know what, I guess it's the first time you've ever thought about having to cover yourself. You're like, I guess this is what nice fabric feels like or whatnot. No, what God does is he's going to get rid of that junk that they've covered themselves with, and he's going to do it himself. So that's another element of grace, right, is that God is going to provide them clothes. Now, some want to go deeper into this and say, okay, well, where do the skins come? He had to kill an animal, provide a sacrifice to give the covering. That could be there in the text. I just don't think it's explicit. And so we can't make too much about that, but we do see that God covers them. And that is going to be something that will, that's a kind of a bridge for their fellowship with him in the future. In fact, later on, and let me see if I put it in my notes here, if we were to look at something like Exodus 28, so I'll throw it open on the screen for you, Exodus 28. Let's look at 42. Notice what God is saying for the priests. Giving the priests, make them linen undergarments to cover their naked bodies. These must extend from waist to thighs. They must be worn by Aaron and his sons whenever they enter the tent of meeting or approach the altar to minister in the sanctuary, so they may not incur guilt and die. This is to be a permanent statute for Aaron and his future descendants. So it's interesting. I do think there's a piece here, right, of a relationship of the priests in the future needed to be covered in order to do their job in the tabernacle and the temple. And now Adam is going to need to be covered, but God is going to provide that clothing. By the way, I think there is a connection, right? The priests had to be clothed to work amongst God and to do their priestly duties in the same way that Adam had to be. Remember, Adam and Eve, it seems to be in that text, when God created the world, he was originally a priest, right? He was there to serve God and to worship God and to have that relationship, that fellowship with God. And now he's being pushed out of the presence as a result of sin. He's got to have his nakedness covered, but God will do that for him. Notice a couple other things in this, right? Verse 22, since man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil, he must not reach out and take from the tree of life, eat, and live forever. Now, this is kind of an interesting thing. So had man lived in the garden and not been expelled, the implication is they could be continuing to, hold on, outside my screen. You can't see that and find the nice fruit. They could be taking fruit from the tree of life and continuing to live. But the problem would be at this point, right, is they would be perpetually living forever in their sin. And that's not been dealt with. So one of the things that we see is God is saying, I'm going to push him out. Because first off, that's another thing. This is another aspect of that judgment. Because that relationship has been severed, they're pushed outside the garden. They are not going to enjoy perpetual presence of the Lord like they enjoyed prior to. It's going to be different. They have a relationship with God, but it's not going to be the same. It's not going to be the same like we do see at the end of the Bible, where there is no death anymore. There is no sickness. We get to enjoy the presence of God. So that is cut off from them. I think it's interesting to note, though, it says the Lord sent him from the Garden of Eden to work the ground from which he was taken. He drove the man out, stationed cherubim and a flaming, whirling sword east of the garden to guard the way to the tree of life. Two other things, and I'm done, okay? Notice east. East is leaving the presence of the garden. So when you follow in the rest of the Old Testament, to go eastward is usually towards Babylon, towards some exile or judgment. To come back west is to come back into the presence. It's just kind of an interesting little thing to note in the text. But the other piece of this is notice what God does to guard the presence, right? To guard access to that relationship that way is cherubim. Think about later on when you think about what's in the tabernacle, what's in the temple, what's there to mark what's behind, right? Is the cherubim, right? They're there to mark. They're in the veil. They're put on the ark. They're there to show that this is that access, that relationship with God as well. So there's a lot that Moses is going to do and highlight later on with the creation of the tabernacle, what's going to be built up and put into the temple as well. But there's a few things we understand, right? And I just want you to bring this home. Sin has changed the game now, right? So God will not allow sin to remain in his presence like the way that it was meant to be. That relationship's changed. Creation has changed now as a result. What we used to enjoy is not enjoyed because we've lost that as a result. But God, even in this, is giving glimpses of hope, of the things that will return. And you'll see that carried out in the Pentateuch of what we're going back towards with a covenant relationship with God as we're trying to follow him. And then we get to the end of our Bible of how God will restore and bring it all back together, where we will be perfect because we now are made perfect by the work of Jesus. So our new bodies, our new life that he gives us when we're with him in the future, now living amongst him forever, having access to all the trees as well. So kind of fun things to think about. I hope that's helpful. Just kind of what took place next. I do want you to think about one last thing. It's the seriousness of sin, right? They ate one fruit. They had one rule, one fruit. They did it. They got kicked out. And I think sometimes we belittle little sins. Oh, it wasn't a big sin. It really wasn't. But all sin is really important, right? All sin is still going to drive me further from God, as we saw in one of the videos I made before. Just think about that. One little thing. It's gone from that. It's going to continue to spiral out of control in the rest of the Genesis text too, and throughout the Bible. So hang in there. We'll talk to you guys soon. I hope you like this. Comment if you need anything. Email us if you want to have more like this. If you've got any questions or if you've got some things you'd like to see covered, let me know. Talk to you later.